Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is cleared for stream live on Twitch, and I'll be sharing these videos on YouTube as well. My name is MJ, student pilot and an aerospace engineering student. I'm here to share my experiences as being a student pilot, react to videos on current affairs, report on news in the aviation industry, and also discover new stuff with you lot. As I'm still learning, I want to share my process of learning, and yeah, hopefully we can have some fun. Stay tuned for a lot more to come, and yeah, please like, comment and subscribe. Keep coming back, share this video to anyone that you know, and hopefully this channel goes big. Thank you.
Last night and this morning to go over all the information in it and to kind of assemble it in a way that we can explain to you from a cockpit perspective, almost a second by second delineation of what took place inside that cockpit. I did a video yesterday talking about the Wall Street Journal air current and the Reuters report that talked about the fuel control switches being placed at cutoff. That is consistent with what is in this report. In addition to that, there is some amplifying information about the timing of all of that. You can draw your own conclusions. In a preliminary report like this, they don't generally come to a definitive reason for why something was done. They just tell you the somethings that were done, and then you can draw your own conclusions. Now, the final report may be a year or two away. In that report, many times they will go to the why part of it and try to come up with a definitive reason for why. But I think it's pretty clear from this report exactly what happened in that cockpit on June the 12th. So let me begin at the top of the report, and then I'm going to amplify some of the information for you. It's absolutely fascinating, all right, and especially the conversation back and forth between the two pilots, because now we have the cockpit voice recorder information. That's something that Reuters and Wall Street Journal didn't have. So the background is this: on June 12th, 2025, that was just last month, Boeing 787 operated by Air India out of Ahmedabad to Gatwick Airport crashed about 60 seconds after takeoff. It was AI-171. We know all that information already. They assembled a team almost immediately, and over in India it's the AAIB, it's their Aviation Investigation Board. Then they brought in the NTSB from the United States. You wonder, well, why did they do that? Well, because it was a Boeing product that was involved, and so they'll always bring in the country of manufacturer origin. So they invited the NTSB in addition to that. There were citizens on board from the UK, Portugal, and Canada. So they also invited the Canadian TSB and some others in to help assist with the investigation. The final team that was put together consisted of the NTSB from the US,
Brits born before 1980 with no life insurance may be eligible for this.
Technical advisors from Boeing and GE. Why GE? GE was who produced those engines. So the engines on the wings were General Electric engines, and the FAA. So all of that team with all the other players put together were assembled. The next page tells us who was in charge of the investigation. All of the local Indian authorities with all of their names are listed.
Highlighted this or is talking about it, but I think it's absolutely germane to the root cause behind what actually happened in this crash. And here it goes. Experienced pilots, engineers, aviation medicine specialists, aviation psychologists, and flight recorder specialists have been taken on board as subject matter experts to assist in the investigation. Why in the world would they bring in an aviation psychologist to help with this investigation? I think that's absolutely critical and important to where this is going. I think a year from now, or whenever the final report comes out, I think the aviation psychologist is going to be a huge player in the final conclusions. What this tells me is this: once they downloaded the information from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, it was clear that one of the two pilots, one of the two human beings in that cockpit, placed those fuel control switches from run to cut off. And so therefore, I think having a psychologist involved in this conversation is hugely important. That's one of the reasons why we're going to open up a conversation on this channel going forward about the mental health and certainly the emotional health of
Well, talking about health, it's 20 plus degrees in the UK, so stay hydrated. I got my water. Everyone, you get your water. As we enjoy this reaction and getting to know more information about this plane crash, stay hydrated at all times.
pilots. In fact, we're going to do an interview here in just a few minutes after I get done with this video. We're going to bring in Dr. Charlie Carreri. Charlie is the absolute expert in this area of mental health for pilots. He is a pioneer in the field. He started a program called Project Wingman at my airline. Project Wingman now has been exported to many airlines around the world. Charlie is the guy that has spearheaded that effort. And in fact, Charlie sat on the investigation board for the German wings crash, which is very similar in scope to this crash here. So you want to hear from Charlie. Look for that interview later on this week. But let's continue on with the preliminary report. Over on the next page, it says this: all applicable airworthiness directives and air service bulletins. The difference between those two is this: a directive is something like a recall on a car. It's got to be done. So they will schedule the maintenance on that and they will replace whatever it is. A bulletin is just kind of a heads up. There may be an issue. Take a look at it if you want to. It's not any big deal. It's no safety of flight, but it's a bulletin, and we want you to take a look at it. There was an airworthiness bulletin directed about a 737 issue related to the fuel control switches, and they lay it out down here in the next paragraph. The FAA issued special airworthiness information bulletin, all right, that's the lesser of the two, on December 17th back in 2018 regarding the potential disengagement of fuel control switches in the locking feature portion of them. The bulletin was issued based on reports that operators of Model 737 airplanes, this is not the 787, but they are a similar type switch, the 737 airplanes, that the fuel control switches were installed, keyword, with the locking feature disengaged. All right, so let me show you a picture now on the screen of what the locking feature is. It's just a little piece of metal that's flat on one side and it's rounded on the other. The switch now that is spring-loaded gets grasped by the pilot's hands, it gets pulled out, and it gets placed on top of that little flat piece of metal. When the two engage, that's the detent that holds it in place. And it can't jiggle out, it can't vibrate out. It stays in there. Why? Because it's spring-loaded into position, but it's also held by that piece of metal. If that whole mechanism were installed upside down, which it could be, you couldn't actually put the fuel control switch into the run position. Why? Because it would slide off every time. It wouldn't lock into place. It would slide off. So if it was installed backwards, you would know that immediately. Apparently, they had some installation problems. This is just my theory on what this is talking about. It was installed probably backwards or improperly, and they knew right away. Was that an issue on the 787 and Air India 171? No, it wasn't, because it's been working just fine. There were no issues with it as far as we know from any report, official or unofficial. So with that being said, take that for what it's worth, all right? But there was some wiggle room put in here for the fact that the fuel control switches might not have locked or engaged properly. I don't think that was an issue at all in this incident. Now, continuing on, I want to take a look now next at, and there's lots of information here about the crash and how the airplane landed and what buildings it hit and what part of the airplane hit first and second and all that. I want to go to the data now from the data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, because this is the play-by-play, second by second, what took place in that cockpit, and it starts from the takeoff roll. So let me begin there. According to the flight data recorder, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed of V1 and achieved 153 knots of indicated airspeed at 080833 universal time. So 0808 is the first time marker on this report. What is V1? That's the go, no-go speed. If you get to V1, you're going to go flying. You're not going to stop on the runway ahead of you. If you're prior to V1 and there's some engine failure, fire, whatever it is, and you're going to abort or reject the takeoff, you can do so in the remaining runway. You're going to stay on the ground. So they're past V1 now. So they're committed to go flying. They're at 153 knots. The V1 speed of 155 knots was achieved as per the flight data recorder at 080835. That's just 0.2 of a second, 0.02 of a second later. All right, the aircraft air-ground sensor transitioned to the air mode. I talked about that on yesterday's video. When you're on the ground, you're in the ground mode, and things are blocked out on the ground. For instance, if I were to inadvertently grab the landing gear handle and try to raise it, could you raise the landing gear on the ground? No, you're on the ground. The airplane knows that. That's blocked out. It won't let you do that. Could I deploy the rat on the ground? No. If I cut off both fuel control switches in the air, the rat would deploy. On the ground, no, you don't want that to happen, because every time I go to the gate and I set the parking brake, I cut fuel to the engines. So we want the rat to stay up. So air ground, the air logic is now in the air mode, consistent with liftoff at 080839. The aircraft achieved a maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots, indicated airspeed, about 080842. This is just tenths of a second later. And immediately thereafter, watch this, the engine 1 and
my teeth were falling to pieces, and I needed a fresh start, and I needed to be able to smile and laugh without covering my face.
Followed by engine 2, fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff. Position one after another with a time gap of 1 second. Why is that significant in our theory that it was done by one of the pilots? Let's say for some reason they just weren't in the detent properly, which is not a thing, but they were, and the airplane was vibrating. And I've heard some people talk about, did they just vibrate out of that position? They would have done so probably at the same time. The fact that they did so 1 second apart from each other is consistent with how we start and how we cut off the engines. So I'm seated in my seat over here, and let's say I'm the first officer. The fuel control switches are to my left. The first officer always starts and shuts off the engines. That's their duty. As the captain, I would instruct the first officer to start the engines. At that point, on the ground, the first officer is going to reach up to the start switches and turn them to start, and then reach down to the fuel cutoff switch, which is in the cutoff position, lift it up and place it over the detent and let it go because it's spring-loaded. They are then going to grab the other one and do the exact same and let go of it. That whole transition takes about a second in between the two. 1 second is absolutely consistent with engage. That's how it works. All right. Now, when we get to the gate and we go to shut them off, I will set the parking brake. I will say to the first officer, shut down the engines, please. He will take, or she will take that first one, usually the left side, right? Because everything we do on airplanes is from left to right. The number one engine, the number two engine, we read from left to right. It's just natural. So we're trained to do that. So you grab the left one, cut off, right one, cut off. 1001, 1002. It takes about a second to do all that. So this is very consistent with what we think to be true so far, that a human being actually put them to cut off. They were positioned one after another with a gap of 1 second. The engine N1 and N2, those are the turbines inside the engine where we're getting a reading of how much power we're getting out of the engine. Both of those now begin to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engine was cut off. So when you put those two switches to cut off, it cuts off a valve in the engine and it cuts off fuel completely. The engines begin now to spool down, and we read that on N1 and N2. The pilots are going to hear it in their ear before they see it on the instrument in front of them. That's important. I'll come back to that in a second. In the cockpit voice recorder now, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? Why did he cut off? Right? So now, if it had been just a mistake, or that somehow the fuel switches had vibrated into the position, you wouldn't turn to the other person and say, why did you do that? Right? You would say, what just happened? Or why did that happen? But you wouldn't say, why did you do that? Right? Why did he cut it off? So here's what's going on. You're driving, you're flying down the runway. You get to rotate speed. So the other pilot calls rotate. You're the pilot at the controls. You pull the nose back of the airplane, and you're using your peripheral vision almost exclusively at this point. Why is that? Because when you pull that nose up, all you're going to see above you is sky. You have no visual reference of anything. So now your peripheral vision watches the ground outside the airplane do like this as you're lifting off, and you've got a normal rate of climb that you're expecting to see happen. In addition to that, you're going to transition your view down to the scope in front of you, or the screen in front of you, that basically shows you're lifting off the ground at a normal rate. So all of those things are happening at the same time. Your peripheral vision is going to pick up anything that's not normal, and if the person next to you reaches over, or on this side, the first officer reaches over and grabs the fuel control switches, we don't know who did it, whether it was the captain or the first officer. It really doesn't make any difference at this point. One of the pilots did. The other pilot is going to see it out of the corner of their eye. At first, it's not going to register. You're going to go, what? What was that? Right? And then you're going to hear it. And that's the biggest indication. You're going to hear those engines begin to spool back.
Teenagers are building businesses with AI, while the only AI you know is ChatGPT.
Let's be real. Most
At that point, you're going to go, whoa, wait a minute. Did I just see what I thought I saw? That takes a split second. You're going to turn to the other person and you're going to say, why did you do that? Now, whatever comes out of the mouth of the other person at this point is really kind of irrelevant. I think the report here goes on to say that after he said, why'd you cut it off? He says the other pilot responded that he did not do so. I have 8 kids, and every time I caught my kids red-handed in something and I would confront them with it, they would say, I didn't do it, all right? I don't think what comes out of the other pilot is relevant to this. There's only 2 people in that cockpit, and one of them saw the other do like this and heard the engines roll back. There is no procedure anywhere in the history of aviation where immediately after rotate, you grab both fuel control switches and place them to cut off. There simply is not. This was not a mistake. This was something that was done intentionally. So with that being said, it's consistent with 1001, 1002. The pilot now at the controls, or maybe the other pilot, maybe it was a pilot flying that did it. We don't know. Looks, confronts the other pilot. You're going to go naturally back and look outside the airplane for a second. Maybe you're going to push the power levers up. That takes a second or two. You got to work through denial for a couple of seconds. And then at some point when you see it registers with you what's going on, you're going to instinctively reach over and grab those fuel control switches and put them back in the run position. That happened here. So all of that, when they were placed to cut off, the rat deployed about 4 seconds later. That's consistent with how the rat works. That's why we saw the rat. And then the pilot now says, as according to the flight data recorder, both engines N2 values passed below the minimum idle. The rat deployed at that point. Now it goes on to say that the engine 1 left fuel cutoff switch transition from cutoff back to run at about 08852. All right. And this is 10 seconds later. So 10 seconds after they were cut off, they were placed, both of them were placed back to run. I think they were placed back to run 2 seconds apart from each other. So that would be consistent with 1001, 1002. He puts the one up, looking outside, okay, grabs the other one, puts it back up. At that point, the way the airplane is designed, it's designed to introduce fuel again to the engines, but also spark. You don't have to reach up and grab those start switches anymore. It's airborne and it knows that you want those engines immediately, so it's going to give spark and ignition, and it's also going to give fuel. It indicates here that that both engines did light off, that they arrested the decay of the spool down of the engine. Engine number 2 fuel cutoff was also transitioned to run. We know that already. When fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run while the aircraft is in flight, each engine's full authority dual engine control, the FADEC, right, automatically manages a relight of thrust recovery sequence and ignition of fuel introduction. All of that's taking place right now. The EGT, what is that? The exhaust gas temperature. That's the one of the ways that we measure how much power is coming out of the back of the engine, was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating relight. So they both relit, and that's good news at this point. Engine 1's core deceleration stopped, reversed, and started to progress to recovery. So that we've stopped the decay, and we're starting to get a little bit of power out of this engine. Engine 2 was able to relight, but could not arrest core speed deceleration, and reintroduced fuel repeated to increase core speed acceleration and recovery. That engine never produced any positive thrust, and it was the 2 seconds later that it was behind engine number 1 at about 08:09:05 UTC. One of the pilots transmitted "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." The air traffic control inquired about the call sign. No further communications came from inside the aircraft. So the initial report that everybody was reporting, that there was a Mayday call from one of the pilots saying that they had lost thrust or thrust wasn't achieved, doesn't appear to be true. This is just Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That's all they got at that point. At that point, one of the engines had begun to spool up. The other had not yet. It was too late. There wasn't enough thrust coming out of those engines, even though the pilot let's assume the pilot at the controls grabbed him and put him back to run. What a brave, heroic, and valiant presence of mind thing to do when you're going through what is an unthinkable situation shortly after rotate. The presence of mind of that other pilot is absolutely incredible, in my opinion. To grab those fuel control switches and put them to run was absolutely the right thing to do. If they'd had a little more altitude, they might have gotten some more power out of those engines and climbed out of it. It was too short a flight for that to happen. We know now the rest is history. The airplane collided with the buildings off the end of the runway. All that is very tragic. These are the preliminary facts in the finding. You can draw your own conclusions about whether it was they vibrated out of the position or they were actually placed there by a human in that cockpit. We don't know which human. But we're transitioning on this channel to talk about the mental health and the emotional health of pilots. There's never a bad time to have that discussion. So even if you don't agree with my conclusions on this and what I think happened, it's always a good time to have a discussion about the mental health and the mental or the emotional well-being of pilots who are occupying a very important job in a very stressful situation. So there it is. There's my analysis of the preliminary report. You can draw your own conclusions. Look for that video later on this week where we're going to interview Dr. Carreri. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion with a guy who has a lot of knowledge in this area. Well, now you know.
Well, now that we've heard from Captain Steeeve, I have my own conclusions in this scenario. There is a likelihood of it having vibrated out of position, but at the same time, that's also very rare in all the modern aircraft that is produced nowadays. So, and these pilots must have had multiple runs through simulators to be able to avoid the situation. But the key part is the mental health side of it. If you are out there and you want to become a pilot, you really need to be able to overcome all the challenges that you have currently. Be open to speaking about how your mental state is, so that you get as much help as you can, so that later on you're able to handle these situations personally by yourself. Yeah, I kind of side with his analysis of that scenario based off of the facts that have come in that report. But yeah, you wouldn't wish this on any pilot, to be able to be in such a high pressure moment. We're talking about seconds in between each thing that they had to do, or you spotted that the fuel's in a cut-off position. So how are you even gonna go further up? And you having to switch on one and the other at different times. I can only imagine how much was going through their minds, but I really commend the effort that was put in, and also like condolences to the families that lost their relatives or anyone they know during this process. It really is a sad thing, but these scenarios are rare, because as you know that the aircrafts are really well maintained and the pilots are really competent enough to handle all of these situations that do crop up. Yeah, if you have any opinion, please put it in the chat down below. I will be making further videos similar to this. Like, subscribe, and share my content, guys. I want to really grow this channel to a position where I'm able to get guests onto my channel, be able to give exclusive training sessions for anyone that wants to apply for scholarships, that wants to know about how to get into the industry without being a rich, affluent background person. Anyone that has challenges with money and you need an insight on how you can get into the field, I will be sharing this on this channel and on my Twitch. Thank you everyone that's been watching on Twitch, and thank you everyone that will be watching this on YouTube as well. Yeah, I look forward to the next video that I'll be making. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and yeah, goodbye. It's MJ, and yeah, I'm out.